This past December, we lost one of our board chairs, David Pico, who was, we used to think of him as Mr. Stronger, Faster, Higher. Everything had to be bigger, better. He drove things, and he always wanted to make things happen. And we realized the heart behind everything that he did, and this whole sense that he wanted us to really maximize what this was going to be. The first stream the way that we usually look at programming the festival each year is to think about ways in which we can exploit the ideas that are being expressed in some of our anchor programs. Thematic ideas that grew out of each of these anchors. In the case of Prima Donna, it was all about celebrating and looking at the diva. In the case of the Africa trilogy, it went beyond the idea of the relationship between the West and Africa and expanded it to the idea of this idea of East and West and what those two words mean when they're used together, not only in a global context but in a national context, and even in the case of the city, how the East and West really plays a sense of our identity. And then finally, Erica's piece, Erica Batdorf conceived a piece called One Pure Longing, and the idea looked at sort of oppression and the idea of striving for rights over the last 150 years. So
the thing with the poems don't actually come first. I mean, they do as text, but Andrew and I talk about everything that we do. And we talk about how the collaboration is going to work. I very much have the voice structure in my mind when I'm writing. I suggest certain things, and Andrew nixes them or takes them on. So I think a true collaboration like that makes the work really strong.
It was very rewarding to be able to say to Andrew and to Wayne within the process, ooh, you know, this seems, you know, we're just sitting here now. We'd be happy to add a little more. We don't think we'll overwhelm, you know, the singers.
I read a line of text, and then I hear a contoured melody on top of that. And then there's the far-sighted thing, which is very difficult to see, unfortunately. How does the music, how does the line, how does the melody arc 70 minutes?
For us, the joy of process is so important.
So the whole construct for the show is it's really a conversation about the relationship between the performer and the audience.
This is a form of dance theatre, and it's the kind of combining of movement and language. We were actually interested in how one can destroy the other very easily.
The choreography is very set, and your body knows that. But when it's amazing how difficult it is to speak, especially speaking in the moment, whilst you maintain this other focus.
I find that one of the really fascinating parts of it. The fact that from the word go, really from the time the audience walks in, we're all already on stage, or how would you describe it? We're not really on stage. We're there. We're there. Steph's on one side warming up, we're on another side just all having a chat, and from the word go there's no fourth wall. You know, we address the audience directly, immediately, and I think that it creates it makes it. I think that makes it a sort of a very engaging piece from the get-go, because it's a shared experience. It's a genuinely shared experience.
But it was a part of our trying to understand, what does it mean if we all sing, move, sit silently together to begin our day, and how does that inform this piece? And so that was a huge part of the process. We would have Shorey sing. Shorey would slowly put the poem to music. Shorey would sing the poem, and then Iris and Ira and Audrey would sit there with several different translations, and she would orally speak the poetry to the sound of Shorey singing. So that was a very long process. They're poems, and even though they're sung, they're actually sung in a particular style that is closer to chanting than singing. This is truly three-dimensional poetry. So I sometimes feel like it would be great to prep the audience and say, walk in and look at this like a painting or a piece of music, or experience it rather than trying to understand it. If you just let it wash over you, then I think what the beauty of this piece can do for people is actually take them out of that place in the way music can.
D.D. Jackson has composed the opera Trudeau, and the subtitle is Long March, Shining Path. And I wrote the words for it. I wrote the libretto for it. In fact, Oscar Peterson, in his biography, A Jazz Odyssey, Oscar Peterson spends, if I remember, 3 pages talking about Trudeau. and praising him, saying, in fact, Oscar Peterson goes so far as to say that Trudeau's the only Canadian politician he ever liked. We've been, to a certain extent, propagandized to believe that there is no more struggle, even though there is a great struggle. Canada's ideological orientation means that there's been less violence around racism because it was understood that the best people were going to be at the top anyway. It's only when we are faced with groups that we feel we can ignore, we feel we can marginalize, partly because those groups themselves are disorganized and are disempowered, then they remain marginalized and disempowered. When we want to be equal, when we want to say that we want to be more inclusive of people, we are.
I think that in the artist world and in any world, respect and money are very close together. So sometimes it's not about money, it's about respect. Because as artists, you often ask the question, you say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a playwright in the theaters. Oh, but how do you make your living? Because what they want to know is if you're really good.
People who invent magic have rarely, if ever, received any economic reward for actually inventing it.
I'm not in a commercial form as an artist. I'm really not. So I don't think I'm challenged in the same way. If you are in the commercial end of things, I think it's a completely different question, which does come down to economics. So if someone stealing my work builds my economic opportunities, whereas someone else, that diminishes theirs.
That the availability of everything all the time, any kind of recorded performance will only make live performance that much more rarefied. And
the question is actually that you have to choose your sex, so you want to be male or female, and I think the tendency to choose the opposite sex that you naturally have is quite high.
There's sort of the anonymity and playfulness of the game and being able to do things that you wouldn't do in real life, and then there's a sort of like responsibility of voting and expressing your opinion and trying to sway other people. Other times they'll take a risk and see, I wonder what my life will be like if I do this.
And can you describe?
And we want the winners, the three winners, to show themselves and stand up. And there's the last person that survives. Yesterday we had three last survivors. And then it's the moment where the anonymity sort of goes away and you look around.
All kinds of interesting poetic ironies inherent in the story. The fact that it was based on that his piece was inspired by Stonehenge. And yes, that that this destruction of part of his artistic legacy happened as his health was failing, and I mean it was a very powerful story.
There was something about that interaction and it being an essential thing that the piece lives and that people live and interact with it in space and time.
Every production was slightly different. Every play, the energy was different. A matinee would be different than an evening production. The fact that the audience maybe was a younger audience for one of the performances would change the dynamic again.
People who haven't seen the show, when you walk out of the space, you get to see the actual maquette of Homage. And it's a moment, I think, after the show where it really drops in and you realize, oh my God, this is a real work, this was a real guy, and it was a real beautiful work.
The piece that we did at Queen's Park is a part of a larger story that we're telling. That's this whole universe we built called Wish Come True. And the piece is kind of one of the many lands that's a part of the Wish Come True universe called Rainbow City.
We don't have a training on like fine arts, or we don't have like a sense of like what those boundaries are. I think we got going by breaking them, but naturally. And our early like fine art work was very like violent and very like charged with all this like raw emotion, and it was like our decision that we weren't going to express that in a positive way, so it was like by design almost.
And maybe people will just see it and say that it's happy because they're happy. Maybe somebody will see it and feel bad because they're not as happy as that, It's like there's so many things. We're so complex. It's like, but we want to do, kind of what Disney did, what Warhol did, what Murakami did, and make this like huge idea and spread it to the world in a very big way with like all kinds of heart, with all kinds of realness, and and give that like to the people as one giant art piece.